Ford promised the future, a bold electric revolution, factories retooled, billions invested. The dream of beating Tesla was alive. But here we are in 2025, and that gamble has collapsed. Ford is staring at billions in losses. Dealers are drowning in unsold EVs. Customers are walking away. And Wall Street, they're in shock. This isn't just another corporate misstep. This could be one of the biggest financial disasters in auto history. Today, we're diving deep into Ford's failed EV gamble, how it started, why it collapsed, and what it means for the future of the American car market. Because make no mistake, this isn't just Ford's problem. This is a warning for the entire EV industry. It all started with ambition. Ford looked at Tesla's meteoric rise and thought, why not us? They poured billions into the promise of an all-electric future. New battery plants, shiny EV factories, massive government loans, and partnerships with suppliers. The message was clear. Ford was going all in. The company unveiled its poster child, the Mustang Mach-E, a bold reimagining of an American icon. Then came the F-150 Lightning, the first electric version of America's best-selling truck. Wall Street cheered. The media called it the turning point. Dealers were told to get ready for a flood of customers demanding EVs. For a moment, it looked like Ford had nailed it. Demand was strong, wait lists were long, and investors were thrilled. The company proudly announced it was aiming to build 2 million EVs per year by 2026. But here's the problem. That dream wasn't built on reality. Ford underestimated the costs. Batteries weren't getting cheaper fast enough. Charging infrastructure was still weak. And most importantly, the customers Ford thought would switch to EVs overnight, they weren't ready. The Mach-E sold decently at first, but competition exploded. Tesla slashed prices. Hyundai and Kia rolled out EVs that outperformed Ford in range and tech. Suddenly, the Mach-E looked outdated just a couple of years after launch. Then came the F-150 Lightning. It was hyped as the future of America's truck. But buyers quickly realized the limitations. Towing cut the range in half, charging times were painfully slow, and the price? Out of reach for most working-class truck owners. Still, Ford kept pushing forward. Executives bragged about an EV revolution. They told investors billions more would be spent. The company even split itself into separate divisions, one for gas vehicles, one for EVs, betting everything on this transformation. On paper, it was bold. In practice, it was reckless. Because while Ford was busy chasing Tesla, it was ignoring its biggest strength: reliable, affordable gas and hybrid vehicles that millions of Americans still wanted. By 2024, the cracks were showing. Production costs for EVs were thousands higher than expected. Ford lost over $60,000 per EV sold in some quarters. Yes, you heard that right. Every EV sold was a money pit. And that's when the dream began to collapse. What was supposed to be Ford's shining moment, the rebirth of the company as an EV powerhouse, was quickly turning into one of the most expensive gambles in auto history. The stage was set for disaster. By 2025, the numbers were impossible to ignore. Ford's EV division was bleeding money at a pace no automaker could sustain. Quarter after quarter, the reports came in losses in the billions. In fact, Ford's EV unit alone racked up over $4.7 billion in losses in 2023, and things only got worse in 2024. By early 2025, analysts estimated Ford had already burned through tens of billions trying to catch up to Tesla. For Wall Street, the excitement was gone. Investors who once praised Ford for its bold vision now saw a company in crisis. Ford's stock price slipped, confidence evaporated, and shareholders began asking a painful question. Did Ford bet the farm on the wrong horse? The numbers painted a brutal picture. Each Mustang Mach-E and F-150 Lightning wasn't just unprofitable, it was a financial black hole. Ford was losing between $30,000 and $60,000 per EV sold, depending on the model and quarter. That's not a loss you can simply make up in volume. The more Ford sold, the more money it lost. And the problems didn't stop there. Dealers began pushing back. At first, they tried to play along with Ford's EV revolution. But customers weren't biting. Dealership lots filled up with unsold Lightnings and Mach-Es. Incentives, discounts, and lease deals piled up, but the vehicles just weren't moving. Why? Because American buyers, especially truck buyers, weren't ready to abandon gas. They looked at EVs and saw expensive, inconvenient, and limited machines. Ford had assumed loyalty to the F-150 name would carry over into the Lightning. But truck buyers weren't fooled. A truck that couldn't tow long distances, couldn't recharge quickly in rural America, and cost nearly $80,000 was not a truck for the working man. At the same time, Ford's competitors were outpacing them. Tesla was slashing prices, making the Mach-E look overpriced. Hyundai, Kia, and even Chinese automakers were delivering EVs with longer ranges, faster charging, and better tech at lower prices. Ford couldn't keep up. Behind the scenes, panic grew. Ford quietly scaled back EV production targets. The 2 million per year promise? Scrapped. The new battery plants? Delayed. Billions invested into infrastructure suddenly looked like sunk costs with no clear path to profitability. Then came the workforce cuts. Ford began laying off thousands of employees in its EV division, desperately trying to stop the bleeding. Entire factories sat underutilized. Suppliers complained of slashed orders. The grand EV dream was collapsing under its own weight. By mid-2025, Ford's leadership had to face reality. They admitted publicly that their EV gamble had gone too far, too fast. Instead of being a leader in the EV market, Ford had become a cautionary tale. A company that rushed headfirst into an industry shift without considering whether customers were ready, whether the technology was affordable, or whether the infrastructure was in place. And the losses weren't just financial. The damage to Ford's reputation was immense. The company that once prided itself on building the cars and trucks Americans loved was now being mocked as a follower, desperately chasing trends instead of setting them. Billions were gone. The dream was shattered. And for Ford, the question became, what now? If the financial losses were the first blow, the dealer revolt was the knockout punch. Ford's franchise system, thousands of independent dealerships across America, has always been its lifeblood. For decades, Ford relied on dealers to move F-150s, Explorers, Escapes, and Mustangs. But when it came to EVs, those same dealers became Ford's biggest critics. Why? Because they were the ones stuck holding the bag. Ford demanded massive investments from its dealers to sell EVs. Charging stations, special training, new equipment. In many cases, the bill ran into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per dealership. Ford promised it would all pay off once EV sales took off. But by 2025, those promises looked empty. Lots were filling up with unsold F-150 Lightnings and Mustang Mach-Es. Dealers couldn't move them even with heavy discounts. Customers walked in, asked about gas trucks, and walked out when they saw EV prices. Many didn't even consider them an option. One dealer from the Midwest summed it up bluntly. Ford wants us to push EVs nobody is buying. We're losing money just keeping them on the lot. It wasn't just about money. It was about trust. Ford had set ambitious production quotas, telling dealers they needed to accept more EVs whether they wanted them or not. When sales stalled, Ford was slow to help. Dealers felt abandoned, forced to eat losses while Ford executives gave speeches about a brighter electric future. The result? Dealers began openly rebelling. By 2025, hundreds of Ford dealerships simply opted out of the EV program altogether. Some refused to sell EVs entirely. Others kept just a token number of Lightnings or Mach-Es in the corner of their lot, collecting dust while gas-powered vehicles continued to dominate sales. For customers, the frustration grew as well. Those who had bought into Ford's EV hype found themselves facing problems they hadn't expected. Charging networks remained unreliable, especially outside major cities. Towing capacity didn't match the marketing claims. Cold weather performance slashed battery range. And the price, even after federal tax credits, was too high for most families. Truck buyers, in particular, felt betrayed. For decades, the F-150 had been the reliable workhorse of America. Farmers, construction crews, small businesses, they trusted Ford. But the Lightning didn't deliver what they needed. Many early buyers sold their EV trucks within a year, switching back to gas or hybrid models. The backlash spread online. Forums and YouTube channels filled with angry owners posting about charging failures, skyrocketing insurance costs, and steep depreciation. Ford's EVs quickly developed a reputation as risky purchases, driving even more customers away. At the same time, competitors were seizing the moment. Toyota leaned heavily into hybrids, giving buyers a middle ground between gas and full EVs. GM, despite its own struggles, doubled down on SUVs and trucks buyers actually wanted. Even newcomers from China began grabbing headlines with cheap EVs that made Ford's offerings look outdated and overpriced. Ford's gamble was unraveling in real time. Dealers were refusing to play along, customers were walking away, and Wall Street was losing patience. What was once sold as Ford's future now looked like a dead end. The fallout was clear. Ford wasn't just facing a financial collapse. It was facing a collapse of confidence. And in the car business, once you lose the trust of your dealers and your customers, you're in serious trouble. By mid-2025, Ford was no longer seen as the bold pioneer of American EVs. Instead, it was seen as a warning sign, proof that chasing the EV dream without listening to the market could bring even the biggest names to their knees. But if you thought the fallout was bad, the storm that followed would be even worse. Because Ford's collapse didn't just hurt Ford, it shook the entire American auto industry. Ford's collapse wasn't just Ford's problem. It was a seismic event that shook the entire US auto industry. For decades, Ford stood as one of the big three, a symbol of American innovation and strength. If Ford was in trouble, the message was clear. No automaker was safe. Wall Street analysts started ringing alarm bells. Billions in losses spooked investors, who began questioning whether the EV revolution was even viable in the US market. If Ford, with its brand loyalty, dealer network, and century of experience, couldn't make it work, what hope did others have? And the fallout spread fast. The domino effect on dealers. Across the country, Ford's dealer rebellion set off a chain reaction. Other brands' dealers began questioning their own EV commitments. GM, which had its own aggressive EV push, suddenly faced similar pushback. Dealers who had quietly grumbled now felt emboldened to speak out, pointing to Ford as proof that the strategy was broken. Dealers realized something the automakers had ignored. The customer wasn't ready. Infrastructure wasn't ready. Prices weren't ready. And no amount of marketing could change that overnight. A blow to Biden's EV agenda. In Washington, Ford's failure created political headaches. The Biden administration had tied much of its climate agenda to rapid EV adoption, pouring billions into subsidies and charging infrastructure. Ford's collapse became fuel for critics who argued the government was pushing a future that ordinary Americans simply didn't want. Congressional hearings soon followed, with lawmakers grilling Ford executives about wasted investments and false promises. Clips of frustrated dealers and angry customers went viral, feeding into a broader narrative. EVs weren't living up to the hype. Opportunity for rivals. At the same time, Ford's stumble opened doors for others. Toyota's hybrid-first approach suddenly looked like genius. Instead of losing billions chasing full EVs, Toyota quietly built affordable, fuel-efficient hybrids that Americans actually bought. By 2025, Toyota dealers were celebrating record sales, while Ford's lots sat full of unsold EVs. And then there were the Chinese automakers. Companies like BYD and Geely were producing EVs at a fraction of the cost, flooding global markets with cheap models. While tariffs kept most out of the US, the message was clear. Ford wasn't just losing to domestic rivals. It was falling behind the world. America's car market at a crossroads. The collapse raised a bigger question. What happens to America's car market now? Do automakers double down on EVs, hoping the market eventually catches up? Or do they pivot back to hybrids and gas, accepting that the transition will take decades, not years? Ford's experience became the cautionary tale. It proved that moving too fast, ignoring customer demand, and forcing dealers into costly commitments could destroy billions in value almost overnight. But it also sparked a larger debate about the soul of the American auto industry. For over a century, America built cars that symbolized freedom, power, and affordability. Trucks like the F-150 weren't just vehicles, they were part of the culture. The EV push threatened that identity, replacing it with something many Americans didn't recognize or trust. Ford's gamble collapsing wasn't just a business failure. It was a cultural one. It showed that the future of cars in America isn't about what automakers want. It's about what customers demand. And in 2025, customers were demanding one thing loud and clear: choice. They wanted gas, hybrids, and maybe EVs, but they didn't want to be forced into a single path. So when the dust settled, Ford's collapse didn't just mark the failure of one company's strategy. It marked the turning point in America's EV experiment. The era of unchecked optimism was over. The era of hard questions had begun. And if Ford's downfall proved anything, it's this: the future of America's car market won't be decided in corporate boardrooms or political speeches. It will be decided in dealership lots, in small towns, and on highways across the nation, by the people who actually buy the cars.